I'm Rick Keith, Executive Director of VNA Health Foundation, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to enjoy and hear the findings that Dr. Christopher Kerr will bring to us in this video. We're sorry that we missed having all of you in one place with us physically, but we didn't want you to miss the findings, the research of Dr. Christopher Kerr. He joined us last year in our forum and brought to us such groundbreaking research findings. And this year, he's going to follow that up with even more findings from his research about the death, the vision and dreams of the dying. And so please sit back and enjoy this video brought to you by VNA Health, and from all of us to all of you, live well.
Well, good evening, and thank you very much for inviting me back yet again. For those of you unable to attend, I'm sorry, but I hope you're still able to find meaning in the slides as presented. Last year's talk really began with how I began, which was that I didn't aspire to this sort of work. I fell into it more or less. And in 1999, I was a cardiology fellow, and I wasn't working at hospice very long when I began to understand that my colleagues, my non-physician colleagues in particular, had a much greater appreciation for the non-physical dimensions of dying, the experience, actually, of dying. And from there, it was remarkable to see how intrinsically therapeutic it was for not only the patients, but for their loved ones. What happened after that was I was frustrated in trying to teach this to residents and fellows and medical students because there wasn't a tremendous amount of evidence, and we live in an evidence-based time. So on that basis, we began a series of studies that received absolutely zero attention in the medical literature, but interestingly enough, seeped beyond and into the non-medical community and rapidly went around the world, which is itself problematic. There's this big chiasm between what those who are being treated seem to value and their families, and what those who are in charge of treating them seem to value. So it's been an interesting journey for me. I have to start with some disclaimers. So this has nothing to do with the paranormal. One of the natural temptations when you look at the dying process is to view it as a keyhole in which to view what lies beyond. So questions of religiosity, afterlife, paranormal, etc. And what we've tried to do is actually not editorialize, not superimpose, but just look at the dying process as mystery unto itself, without editorializing. So what we've done in all of our work is simply capture the words and experiences of our patients and try as best as we can to put it in some kind of format that was interpretable and valid. The other thing that needs to be clarified is this is separate from confusional states. So just to be clear, these studies were university approved, which means you had to sign consent. The consent had to be witnessed. We also cleared everybody every day by screening for delirium or confusional states. I think one of the things that gets lost is everybody assumes when you're talking about dying experiences, you're talking about the minutes and hours before death. And the truth is most people do in those periods have changes in mentation, changes in level of alertness and attention and that sort of thing. What we're talking about is people who are often days, weeks, months prior to death. Another thing that we did that was actually done from a defensive position is we started to film people. I knew very early on that there was assumptions going to be made, that there was assumptions these people were confused or broken in their mind, that they were frail and feeble. And so it became very important that we captured them on film. Ironically, the footage that we shot is actually the core elements of a full-length documentary in a Netflix audience. But again, originally it was designed to present to a medical audience, and in truth never got to see it because they weren't that interested. So I think that sums up essentially what we're talking about. Definitionally, end-of-life experience are these subjective events that people have. It actually it refers to exactly the experiential piece of dying, the non-physical parts of dying, and often includes these remarkable dreams and visions. Just to quickly recap a lot of what I was trying to show last year in our first series of studies, what we did is we had a standardized questionnaire. And we asked people daily until death what their experiences were. We asked a number of things. Were they awake and sleeping? Were they real? How real on a 1 to 10 scale? We asked them to look through a menu list of what the content was, whether it was comforting, discomforting. And then we included qualitative components that looked more deeply at the meaning and the experience, what it felt like for them. And in that first round of studies, we found that 88% of people were in fact having these experiences at least once. As they approached death, there was a dramatic increase in frequency of these experiences, predominantly of seeing people who they loved and who had passed. And that was interesting because when we measured comfort on a 0 to 5 scale, with 5 being the most comforting, people who were seeing the deceased had the most comforting dreams. So it's as though there's this built-in mechanism as you approach death, that there's an increasing frequency of this feeling of reunion, of being loved, of being returned, and that, interestingly, did two things. It provided overwhelming comfort, and it lessened the fear of dying. The difference with the videos I'm going to show this year as opposed to last year is some of the videos are actually the same people, but we've included their family members. I mean, among the many things that hospice gets enormously correct is we treat people in the context of their lives, and we honor their relationships. Nobody dies alone. They die in the context of those who care for them and whom they care for. So what you're going to hear is what the effect of these experiences meant. And it turns out what's interesting is how people die absolutely affects how they're bereaved. And you're going to see this again and again. Since then, we've done several studies. We've actually surveyed over 750 bereaved family members and actually shown that people who are partnered or who witness these events have actually meaningful positive effects in their bereavement process. So the first video is of a woman named Ginny. And a couple things to pay attention to that we hear again and again and again. Vividness, striking vividness. Very little is said. Enormous amount is felt, understood, carried inward. It sounds what she's describing, it could be a script for a horror movie with people touching her, but that's not the experience. And people don't come out of these events asking for analysis or what the metaphor is or how it should be interpreted. They're just given an understanding. They're giving an experience and a memory. And this is Ginny, and this is her daughter talking about this.
I think more and more people are getting a little bit more hip to dreams than they were before.
When I think of my mother, I just think of a really vivacious, energetic. She was the type of person that when she walked into a room, it lit up. So when I walked in one morning, she said, I had the most amazing dream. And I said, tell me about it. And she said it was so detailed and so real that she felt that it was actually happening. And
I was laying in bed, and people were walking very slowly by me. The right-hand side, I didn't know, but they were all very friendly, and they touched my arm or my hand when they went by. But the other side were people that I knew. My mom and dad were there, my uncle. Everybody I knew that was dead was there. And they passed and did the same thing.
she described this as more of an event that she would believe almost happened. She knew that it didn't she didn't believe it happened because she woke up and she was at home, but she said it was as if she were in a different place.
Boy, I remember seeing every piece of their face. And I mean, I know that was my mom and dad and uncle and my brother-in-law.
That dream and her successive dreams and experiences made her feel comforted.
I felt good. I felt good to see some people. And the other ones didn't bother me either. I have seen my mother recently more. I can't say that my mother and I got along all those years, but we made up for it at the end.
And she said to me, "I'm not crazy, Jewel." And I said, "I don't think you are, Mom. It's okay."
When I told my family that I was happy about it, and that's what they asked. How does it make you feel? Well, I feel good about it.
I feel the comfort and the peace that some of these experiences brought to her gave her exactly what she needed to pass on. For me, it affirmed that you're not alone when you die.
So that's Ginny. One of the remarkable themes or takeaways we find in this is that there's a sense that you're returned to wholeness at the end, that we all have wounds for having lived, and that they're often addressed. And for Ginny, it happened to be, there was more detail in the backstory of her mother, but there's this sense of being put back together. Some of the stories are remarkable and just abundantly obvious. A gentleman who lost an arm as a child playing around trains at a time when you were more likely to be doing blue-collar and physical work. In fact, his mother put him into a reform school type saying, hoping to get a better education. But his whole identity was shaped, obviously, by this childhood experience and wondering how he was going to cope, how he was going to provide. And that obviously, that kind of injury or trauma never leaves. And at the end of his life, his dreams are that his coworkers return to him, and each one of them pass by him, telling him that he did things better than anybody else, that he was a remarkable employee and a remarkable person. We had a mother whose child was in prison, and again, this went to her core identity of who she was. And in her dreams, her deceased parents come to her and tell her what a remarkable person and parent she was. And this is really fascinating. We did a study that was been published. We looked at dying as a post-traumatic growth experience. And so for those of you who aren't aware, are there positive gains in negative experiences such as war and trauma and dying? And what was fascinating is that people who were dying, who were having these experiences, showed remarkable gains in post-traumatic growth, spirituality, insight, adaptation, understanding. And this really goes to the crux of, I think, how perhaps this should be a bit of a paradigm shift in how we're viewing dying. What we tend to see dying as is a lessening, as a physical deterioration, and then obviously our own experience of grief and loss. But just because you're dying doesn't mean you don't stop living. And there is such a dramatic change in your vantage point of perception and perspective that, not surprisingly, there are all these things going on underneath, and they're actually they're measurable. This next video is of a gentleman named Paul, and what's neat is, remember, he's 3 weeks from dying when this is shot. And he kind of hit all three major areas. One, he sees the image of his wife and in vividness that again is palpable to him. The other is this notion of travel. That's about a third of people, if not traveling, preparing to go. And what's interesting is they don't come out of that understanding the metaphor. They just tell you, yeah, it's weird. I was packing and going on a train, where the obvious transition seems to be clear. The other thing he does is he returns to an event that brought him proximate to his own mortality, which is war. So there's an often return to these really pivotal, impactful moments of life. And you're also going to hear his daughter talking about what it meant for her.
My father is a remarkable man. He was 82 when he died. He was a fun-loving, very smart, very interesting man, interested in a lot of things and a lot of fun. But Dad was always dreaming about Mom.
I probably had 15 dreams about her, maybe, somewhere in there. She always I dream in color most times, and she always wears a beautiful light blue. It could be a suit, it could be a gown, it could be a dress, but it's always light blue. And a couple of times she's gave me the little beauty pageant wave, and a couple of times she sort of always with a smile. Only one or twice I've ever heard her voice, but she always kind of lets me know that she's fine. I get that feeling after a dream like that.
My father's experience seeing my mother in his dreams was always good. He never, to my knowledge, had a dream where he was sad or unhappy when he woke up after dreaming about my mother. It was always good. She was always smiling. His feeling always was that she was letting him know she was okay, that this was good and she was all right.
So I had this crazy dream. I'm packing goods, and I'm setting them for some reason up high.
I never had any doubt that what he was dreaming was accurate and that he was reporting it completely to us and enjoying his dreams. He had dreams about his friends in the military. When he was in the Army as a young man, right after my parents got married, he was drafted and sent to Germany, and he would have dreams about his friends.
I'm at Fort Devens up in Massachusetts, where they were forming this company that we're going to oversee, a new company. And the guys are all young. They're like, I remember them, and I'm old. And I'm trying to tell them, guys, I've been here, I've done this, I'm not going to do it again. And they're arguing with me. And that's a crazy dream.
Well, the more I thought about it, the more I appreciated the memories we had of Dad and his dreams, and that we did take some comfort from that. I definitely feel that having those memories of my father's dreams and him sharing them with us keeps us connected, most definitely. My father's dreams definitely changed how I looked at him and what he appreciated in life. Most definitely, he got it down to what was important. His buddies and my mom, and not in that order. Mom. In a way, it makes me think, I hope that that happens to me, that some of my positive memories as a child, as a young adult, maybe as a young mother, will come back again to me, and I'll be able to relive them. This is a part of the whole process, and that when patients, when their family members talk about a dream, listen, because there's a great deal to be learned from what they're sharing with you.
I tell everybody my mother.
One of the interesting things we noticed very early on is that at the end of life, the time seems very irrelevant. You could be 95 years old, you lost your mother when you were 5, and it's her voice you hear saying, I love you, or her perfume you smell. And conversely, people who withheld love, nurturing, conditioned love, harmed, they seem to be excluded from these experiences in a remarkable way. So there's this kind of final justice where the scales are things like love and forgiveness. And this is really a remarkable story of Beverly. And I'm going to tell you a bit of the background story because I think it's equally as compelling. So this is Beverly and her husband, Bill. And that's Beverly on the right with her 2 children, Susan and Scott. And Beverly's story is interesting. She grew up outside of Cleveland, and she grew up with a very strict mother who actually would do things like when she came home, would make her hold a toothbrush and polish furniture for X number of times. So it was a cold house. There wasn't a lot of warmth from her mother, but she had a father who had this interesting and appropriate name named Mentor. And he was a mailman, and he was the opposite. He was openly affectionate. They enjoyed laughter and closeness, and they almost had this existence in the house and then another one outside of the house. And he was a mailman. And what she would do is she would time the day when she would leave the house after school, after doing her chores, and she would meet him in a clearing by the woods, grab his hand, and they would finish the route. So she's going to reference that, so that's part of the story. The mother never appears in any of her end-of-life experiences. Then on the right, so Beverly and Bill couldn't have children. And they went to an orphanage, and they did what people do. They looked for the child with all the life in their face, the ruby cheeks, giggle, whatever. And that was Scott, the little boy on the right, and they brought him home. And for a year, she was tormented by the child that she didn't bring, the one that she didn't need, but the one that needed her. So her and Bill go back to the orphanage looking for the child with the vacant eyes, who was unlikely to be chosen. And that's Susan, who you're going to see in the film, who to this day views herself as the luckiest child to have the parent she did. And Susan actually was born to a woman who was raped at 16 and who tried to self-induce abortion by starving herself, so she was premature. And Susan at this age had already had 2 abdominal surgeries. And that's the little girl she takes home, who, of course, ends up being the one who cares for Susan, for Beverly at the end of her life. The other part of Beverly's story is her mother called her an ugly duckling and said she had 2 left feet. And she met this wonderful Irishman named Bill, who loved music and loved to dance. And one of the great joys of their married life was they were phenomenal dance couple. And apparently the floor cleared. So her long life, she's got this kind of unusual childhood with this dichotomy between a parent who loves her and one who withholds love. And that's one set of dreams she has. And of course the other is the dancing when she says she feels, as he described it, as her princess.
I tell everybody my mother was my best friend. We shared everything. There was nothing that we didn't keep from each other when I was having problems or whatever. I always felt that I was comfortable and can go to her with some of the things that often kids maybe not feel so safe talking about.
Do you dream about your family at all?
My dad,
Your dad?
yeah. He was one of my favorites.
She woke up one morning and she said, "I got to get the route finished." I said, "Oh, okay, what do you mean by I got to get the, you know, Daddy and I have to get the route finished."
Well, he was a mail carrier,
Okay.
and he would wait for me when he'd come home and I could finish the route with him.
And then this recurred a number of times. Okay, so like say the second time she would say, "I have to help with the route," she would start using the names of the people who were in the houses, because after a while, the people who lived in those homes would come out to meet my grandfather, get their mail. And then so she would say, "Oh, well, Mr. Smith had this blue tie on." And I remember it always seemed like he had a blue tie on Tuesdays. Talk about it. It wasn't like it was past tense, even though I knew this was in a time frame in her past when she was younger, but she talked about it as though she were that age with my grandfather and telling it like she, you know, was with him at that all night and they'd been doing the route.
I did dream about us dancing, and they had taught us a new dance step. They wanted us to perform it, and I remember that.
It's a nice dream.
It is. It's it's a wonderful dream.
She would describe the dress or whatever it was and whoever it was that was playing, whatever band was going to be, you know, at this supper club. And those experiences were real for her and very empowering for me to see she's not frightened. She's not worried at all about what it is. This is joy and happiness. You always worry that they're in pain. And, you know, what I realized was she wasn't in pain. She was living in these moments of joy. I think it's very easy, like, oh, they're drugged up or they're losing their mind. I never once thought my mother was insane or was that these were like delusional or whatever. And it doesn't mean there's not the loss, but it made it, this is the pain that's filled with love and great remembrance. And I couldn't have asked for anything better.
Personally, my favorite chapter in the book that I wrote is one titled "Of Different Minds." One of the things, unfortunately, that happens when you're doing our sort of research is you exclude people who can't understand the implications of consenting to a study. When you think of how much dementia, for example, is out there, and the fact that they aren't necessarily fully understood or investigated is a problem. I also think it's a problem that we tend to talk about people who are cognitively different in terms of their deficits. That's the currency we use, particularly when we medicalize them. So when we talk about dementia, we talk about their performance on a cognitive plane or dimension. And what's lost in there is that people often have very rich emotional lives, textures and tones and histories that aren't assessed or aren't understood. And in some ways, I actually think they're sometimes more vibrant than those of us who are cognitively intact. One of the people in the book is actually my medical partner's mother, who lived in the Netherlands during when the Nazis occupied, and she was traumatized in unbelievable ways. She was casted so she wouldn't be put into a breeding program. Her principal was shot in front of her. And then she endured a number of horrible traumas. She had her first husband who was lost at sea. She emigrated to the United States reluctantly, but there were relatives here in Cincinnati. She married my partner's father, and then her first child died of leukemia at age 3. Then her husband dies at a relatively young age from a heart attack. And my partner and her family describe her in less than glowing terms. She was bitter, she was angry, she blamed everything in her life on being victimized and being out of her control. And she then became demented. And then everything became blamed on the Nazis. If you lost the remote control for the TV, it was the Nazis. If the dinner was cold, it was the Nazis. And that's where she lived. Then an interesting thing happened. As her dementia advanced, she got placed back to a more distant time, and the time in between was erased, which is not uncommon for a demented person not be able to tell you what they had for breakfast, but they can tell you what they wore, the dress they wore at their prom. And where she got placed back to was a time when she was a mother, when her 3-year-old was alive. And she spent the last months of her life looking at the picture, blowing the picture to the child, saying, "I love you." But it transformed who she was psychologically. And this person who was generally cruel and dismissive of people, now if somebody came to help her in her room, one of the aides or nurses, she would greet them with a big hello and "how are you" and "thank you." So she became somebody entirely who she wasn't in the last decades of her life. It got so pronounced that they had to cover with cloth the mirrors that were all throughout the building and apartment, because whenever she saw them, she didn't like the old lady in the mirror anymore. So she was very much alive. There's another young lady in the book named Sammy who was Down syndrome, who was in her 30s, and she had always been extraordinarily maternal, carried babies, blanketed them, cuddled them, etc. And she had ovarian cancer, and one of the complications is you often accumulate fluid or ascites in the belly, so it became pronounced. And whenever you would try to talk to her about how she was feeling and how to kind of assess her medically, she always defined it in terms of the fact that she was pregnant. And when she even experienced pain, it was okay because it was the baby moving. So as she's losing her life, she's feeling like she's giving life. The next slide I'm going to show you is of a woman named Sue. And she's describing her mother with advanced dementia, who just prior to death is trying to get dressed and escape the building. And we live in Buffalo, so the thing you do there is you get married in Niagara Falls. So here she is dying, And she's actually emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, she's reliving the best day of her life, which was her wedding day.
So there was a lot of talk about, I had a dream last night and Gary was there, or Gary came to visit me, or we had dinner together. And she got to the point where she didn't even talk about it in terms of dreams. She talked about, I had dinner with your dad and Gary last night. That was not every day, but probably 2 or 3 times a week within the last year or 6 months.
So pretty frequent.
Pretty frequent. And she was very animated about it, very happy. And she didn't even talk about them as dreams. To her, they were something that happened last night. So they made me feel wonderful, because as I was getting off the elevator and thinking, I'm wondering what we're going to talk about today, because sometimes she didn't remember what they did during the day while I was at work, or maybe who else was there, but she always remembered her dream or vision or whatever she had. When I saw her that day, I was like, Mom, why did you go outside? You never go outside. You know, somebody's supposed to go with you. And she looked at me like, well, I was going to meet your father. And I said, well, where were you going? How were you going to get there? And she just kind of looked around. Well, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that she was going to meet him. So then I didn't know what to say at that point, and I said, well, where were you going? And she said, well, we were going to Niagara Falls to get married. Life was different for her those last couple months, because she had like something to talk about, something to look forward to. And those dreams were pepping her up, were making her happy, were making her almost look forward to go to sleep, which I think is great. Seeing that and being a part of it is a gift. And it was a gift for me. And I think it's a gift that should be shared. That at the end of our life, there's a lot of spiritual, emotional work that is being done and changes that are happening that, I don't know, are we too afraid to recognize it, or you think there's not enough time, or whatever. But I think it's as important, if not more important, than the physical things that we have to check off on the chart.
I think most of us who are healthy and cringe at the idea of our own mortality can relate to these beautiful words from Dylan Thomas, this notion of fighting the dying of the light. But he's anticipating, he's imagining what death is. And I think that's relatable to us. But when you actually hear some of these folks, they're describing, they're not fighting against, they're actually trying to get toward. And this comes out again and again and again. The next video is actually one of my favorites. He's very hard to understand, so there's subtitles underneath, and I apologize for that. But watch a couple of things. Watch how he struggles to find language, to find descriptors for what it is he's seeing and feeling. And watch him, his body language, how absolutely overwhelmed he is emotionally. And then, just put it in some kind of rubric, because this isn't that. He's having a different experience that he's struggling to capture. So this is Horace.
There's this just mass green, like a pasture of green, green grass. But again, hard to describe, because it was was a color green that I've never seen before. It was so vivid and so, it was like lifelike.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, it felt good. My wife all of a sudden appeared, and I'm thinking, well, this is even better yet.
Mm-hmm.
She had a certain smile about her that it was kind of like a joke. It was like I got you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, what is the joke? What do you know?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't you talk to me?
Mm-hmm.
She just, there's just no conversation.
Yeah.
Well, she was always beautiful to me, but she was even prettier. She was.
Mm-hmm.
She knew me inside out. You know?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe that, I guess maybe words weren't necessary. We just looked at each other and knew exactly what one was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a good time. I don't know. But everything had left you, like there was no problems. No, everything was happiness. It was like you wish the world was really felt good.
Yeah.
Felt like there was. When you finish paying a bill that had been bugging you for years,
Relief.
it was that relief that it was gone.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it was just a relief. Everything was okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to return to this idea of bereavement. So in the last series of surveys, which I believe were about 500 bereaved family members, over 45% reported that they were witness to these events, which is really remarkable because so rarely is it given permission or alluded to by the clinical team. These were folks who just happened to be able to understand what it was they were seeing. And the general take home was this, is that what was good for the patient is good for the loved one. And we actually looked at grief scales and we showed significant positive gains in terms of transitioning, remembrance, adapting, going forward, etc. So this really does matter, and it's this idea of dying really isn't a medical treatise, but it is a closing of a life, and that never occurs in solitude. This next gentleman, his name Norb, and he's referring to his wife's passing, and he says it better than I can. So
she started like chanting, "I'm going home, I'm going home," over and over and over again, and that's kept up almost all afternoon. I'd give her a drink or something, bring her bed up, and as I brought her bed up, her head would go up and still stare at the ceiling real hard. About, I'll say right around 3 o'clock, I said to her, "What are you staring at so hard up there?" She says, "It's the angels. They're coming down to take me home to heaven." And those were the last words that I ever heard her speak. She was total content. She had been fighting cancer for about 13 years prior to that there. And I knew that now she was at total ease. She's done. That was the end, and she realized that she was happy that she was gone.
And how does
She
that
was-
make you feel?
It put me at ease also, knowing that. It's been hard at times to grieve her loss, but knowing how she died, what mood she was in when she died, has put me at great ease over it, really.
Now, do you think, often about that experience? Do you ever revisit
Oh
it?
yes, oh yes, I think of it there a lot, and still, how I can hear her chanting over and over and over again. It's made me feel at ease, knowing that she was total at ease when she died. It wasn't that she was suffering or anything. She was happy that she was going, and the angels were coming to get her. Definitely has been ease as far as my grieving over her loss, knowing that, hey, that she was at ease when she died. Who do I want to dream of? Her waiting for me up at the gate. She's the love of my life, and I want to be back with her.
Is there anything else you would like medical professionals who take care of people who are dying to know about these experiences?
I think it's a field that really should be looked into deeply. That it's something that affects everybody. It affects everybody differently. The person that's losing somebody it affects, as well as the person that goes. And what their feelings are at the time has a great effect on the survivors, so as to speak. And to know that they went out happy, in a good mood, not suffering, hey, that's the main thing.
So, among the most important conclusions, I think, is that these events don't deny death, but more importantly, they affirm having lived. And that's really where you end up. The other thing that's remarkable is there's always this thread, or usually this thread, of connectivity between and across lives. So you could be a child looking at your mother who's talking to the grandmother. So whether living, dead, it doesn't seem to matter. The currency always seems to be these ties that bind us to one another, which are usually strong, unconditioned love. And sometimes these very impactful points are made through the most trivial of actions and gestures. And this is a wonderful video where I tell it's about the sauce, and she's talking about her boyfriend's end of life, and here she is.
So this is the one and only picture that exists of Patrick and I that was snapped by my niece at a wedding, because neither one of us are overly photogenic, and it just wasn't our style. And this picture, because we did not live together, we each owned our own home, went back and forth for 15 years on each other's mantles. Patrick didn't cook, with one single exception of making his grandmother's sauce, which he did, I want to say, about every 4, 6, 8 weeks through the entire 16 years I knew him. Patrick was the only member of his family that knows how to make the sauce. And for all the years I knew him, he insisted something was missing.
After his grandmother had passed?
After she had passed, and she had passed well before I had ever met him. I even tried to help him make it once, and I got banned from the kitchen because he insisted that an Irish woman was no way could ever make old-fashioned Italian sauce like Grandma used to make. Fast forward to, this would be the Sunday before he passed. He woke up in the morning, and I couldn't get him to eat. He wasn't hungry, total loss of appetite. And I'm like, baby, we got to make you something for breakfast. What do you want? He goes, I'm full. I said, Pat, you had a snack pack pudding yesterday. You're not full. And he's like, oh, no, I ate with Nana Dolores last night. As real as I'm sitting here, he believed he made sauce with his grandmother the night before, said he could smell it, He could still taste it. He was full from it. And she showed him, after all these years, what he had done wrong, which is the very last step before you take it off the burner was to add a teaspoon of sugar. It was so very real for him, to the point, there I am, putting on sweatpants, driving to the grocery store, because we spent the next 7.5 hours, because that's how long it takes, making his grandmother's sauce that day. So, and he was so sick, and it was the only day I was ever allowed to help him. As he sat on the bar stool, and, well, let's say was very strict with the orders of the sauce, and we kept bringing the pot over, so there are certain things only he could do. We made the sauce, he added the sugar. Last time Patrick ever ate. Every morning he woke up saying, "Is today the day I'm going to die?" And I said, "You'll go when you're ready." And he was ready.
He was ready. And you knew he was ready.
And I knew he was ready from this.
Yeah.
I think this is a man who was at peace and very honest. If your last dream in life is about spaghetti sauce, there's nothing more peaceful than that. It didn't appear to be a memory. To him, it appeared that he was participating. And that's one of the things I found very different.
Did that dream help you accept that reality further?
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. And not only the reality that he is gone, it's made me think of maybe there is something out there after we go.
So one of the, obviously one of the more challenging topics is a child's death. And we've actually looked a lot at this, and there's a chapter in the book that covers 3 children, two of whom are actually filmed. And children are different for a number of reasons. They often lack the language, the reference points for dying and mortality. And in fact, if adults are so often comforted by the reunion of people who they've loved and lost, what about children who haven't known anyone, per se, who has died? But they also don't live in regret. They don't talk, for example, about the marriage they're not going to have and that sort of thing. They don't talk about, I wish I had done those things differently. And that's so beautifully captured in this Emily Dickinson poem. The child I'm going to show you is Ginny, and she, like several other children, may not have known adults who have died, but they've all known pets or animals of somebody else's who died. And they return to them in a healthy form and really with the same message. And both children who had these experiences said the same thing. The implication was that they weren't alone, that they were going to be okay, and that they were loved. The video you're going to see is actually edited because Ginny probably covers 6 or 7 dead pets that she knew. Her neighbor's ferret, her grandmother's cat, and her aunt's birds. So you're going to get a very shortened version. And then what she does is she describes the setting she is in, which is interesting in that it's a castle, which of course is securing, and that there's senses to it like light and warmth and that sort of thing. Towards the end of her life, and this is really important to note, she wasn't a particularly religious person, but you're going to hear a lot of those sort of references. And then the video is going to focus on her mother and talks about how she interprets all of this and what it's meant for her trying to care for a dying child and grieve her loss. So this is Ginny.
When I was sleeping, like deep sleep, my Aunt Miriam came down to bring me up to heaven, and she was playing with me with Barbies.
Okay. So when you saw her, she looked good?
Yeah.
Was she smiling?
Yeah.
Okay.
She had to wear...
She what?
She had to wear oxygen
Okay.
because she was very old.
Uh-huh. Did she wear the oxygen in the dream?
No.
She looked better then?
Yeah.
Okay. And you got to play Barbies with her?
Yeah.
Did you dream of any animals?
Yeah.
What type of animals do you dream of?
My cousin's dog that passed away.
What was the dog's name?
Moose.
We-
I see Daisy. That was my grandma's dog.
Daisy?
She passed away.
Okay. And so you get to play with that dog in your dreams?
Yeah.
What does all of this mean to you? You get to see all these animals. That's kind of neat, huh?
Yeah.
So these dreams, is it fun to go to sleep to think about what you're going to see?
Yeah.
Okay. Doesn't scare you then?
No.
Okay. And when you see your aunt, where are you?
In a castle.
Really? Is it beautiful?
Yeah.
Huh.
It's huge.
Describe it for me. Are there other people there?
No.
Okay. Is it warm?
Yes.
Is it sunny?
There's a window that you can see the sun through it,
Uh-huh.
and it has God on the window.
Like a church would?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds beautiful. So this is a pretty special place.
And then there's a piano,
Mm-hmm.
and then a pretty painting of a baby, the little baby. No, the church.
Yeah, like in a church. In a manger kind of thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think the castle is? What does it mean?
Safe place.
Safe place. Yeah. Safe place, and it's sunny and it's warm. And your aunt's there.
And then they have a pool,
Really?
a built-in pool.
Ooh! You like to swim?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You nailed it. And you got the world's best smile. Is there anything else we should know about you?
That I'm beautiful.
You are beautiful.
Right before she went to sleep yesterday, I heard her voice in the bedroom over my baby monitor, and I thought maybe she was calling me, so I asked her, "What did you say?" And she said nothing, and then I heard her voice again, and I thought, what the heck, who was she talking to? So I went in there, and she said she was talking to God, and that he was a very old man, but a very good-looking, cute man, and that he was going to make her all better, and that she was going to go live up in the castle with my Aunt Miriam, who she had been talking to as well, and that there's a big, huge bed there, and I let her know that we were all going to be there together someday, that Mom was going to come there too someday when it's my time. And she said, and God will make you all better when you get there.
What does it all mean for you?
Well, it kind of helps. I mean, sometimes I think it's real. For real? Are you really talking to God? I don't know. After the conversation with God and after my talk with her, she's been just calm. She off and on would talk about the castle and how beautiful it was there. It was warm. There was a swimming pool there. And I still think about that all the time, because now when it rains out, I kidly tell her, "Would you stop jumping in your pool, Ginny? We would like some sun, thank you." It was a beautiful thing to hear, because it just helped. Yeah. It doesn't seem like it because I'm crying, but it does help. Ginny's dreams and visions have helped my grieving process. Most of the time. Sometimes I'm human and I'm doubtful, but
I hear her in the back of my head all the time saying, "No, Mom, there's a castle. I'm waiting for you up here." Yeah, it's helpful because I really truly want to believe that there's a heaven, that there's something, that I'll see her again.
Yeah.
And because of how strongly she believed in it, I can't not believe in it.
Sure.
If we talk about regular medical doctors, I would like them to listen to the patients when they're talking about dying and death and dreams and visions, and they need to believe them.
So I'd like to, we've kind of covered what the obvious impact is for the patient, for the family, but also I'd like to cover where this whole end-of-life experience phenomena fits in terms of our clinical practice and care of the dying. The video I'm going to show is of a young lady in her 20s who's dying of colon cancer. And she has a young child, and she's coming from our local cancer hospital, still firmly believing that there's another battle to be fought. There's more treatment options. And we were stuck. And one of the best doctors I know, Dr. Megan Farrell, was at a loss. All the normal dialogue that you have clinically to try to get people to become informed, aware, self-aware, wasn't happening. And it was impairing and injurious to the family, the mother, the siblings, and we couldn't also help the child in the way that we had wanted or needed to. And then there's a conversation that occurs with her grandfather, who is deceased. So this is Sierra.
Sierra was a 28-year-old African-American woman. She was diagnosed with colon cancer after what seemed like far too long between the presentation of her symptoms and the actual diagnosis. So she went for many months undiagnosed. By the time she was diagnosed, her cancer was already too far advanced to really make an impact or extend her life.
Sierra was very determined to do absolutely everything she could to fight her disease for her son, for her fiance, and for her family.
She was clearly not in the mindset of a dying person. She had little to no insight, at least insight that she would admit to, of the fact that she was nearing the end of life or even heading towards the end of her life.
Her family was not at all ready to see her go. They loved her, and they wanted her to fight this as well.
After we had a meeting, a very touching meeting, where the son finally put words to what was the experience in the room, and that is the question, is my sister going to die? At that point, we decided that we better move the meeting into Sierra's room.
We all gathered together with Sierra. Her mom, her stepdad, her siblings, and her care team here at the hospice inpatient unit. Dr. Farrell was with her, speaking to her, trying to explain to her what we were no longer able to do for her medically.
During that time, what happened was something most profound, and that was that Sierra actually engaged her predeceased grandfather right in the room.
It happens every single time I talk about it. I get goosebumps, I get this sense of amazement and emotion to be there with someone when they experienced a vision like that. She saw her grandfather.
Afterwards, Sierra's mother said, "What did he say?" And he said, "I'm very proud of you. You are a wonderful granddaughter. You are a wonderful daughter. You are a wonderful mother." As the conversation was going on, Tammy asked Sierra, "What is he saying to you now?" He's saying, "I'm going to see you soon, and everything is going to be okay." At that point, Tammy said, "Listen to your grandfather." And it was at that point, really, that the family knew that Sierra's time was limited.
It was probably less than a week after that vision that she was able to let go and she passed. If we discount end-of-life dreams and visions, we're doing a disservice to our patients, to their families, and how they are able to not only experience the loss of a loved one, but how they then are able to grieve later.
I think she gained the comfort that she needed, not to give up, but to be at peace and let whatever was going to happen. I think her grandfather being there, of course, made it a lot more comforting for her. I think had Sierra not had those visions, I think she would have been more frightened. I think she may not have had that, I don't want to say easiness, but that I think she would have been more compelled to vocalize how frightened she was. But knowing that he was there for her, it made it very much easier for me, because I knew she would have him to be with and he would take care of her. It does help me process the loss, because I believe they visit us, both of them, you know. I think, you know, things happen for a reason. And yes, she's not in pain anymore, and she's back to her healthy, playful, joyful self, you know. And he's there to watch over her as he did here. When it comes to dealing with patients who have these experiences, is not to dismiss their feelings and what they are relaying to you, what they've seen, who they're speaking with, because it's real. It's not, in my opinion, it's real. To them, it's real.
Like every good story, there's a story in a story. And I think there's one in the telling of how this work got done from a research perspective and how the book was written. And it's a better version than you probably would think. When we originally tried to do the work many years ago, the research board at the university strongly resisted, actually declined it. And the reason was that dying is this special sanctuary that needs to be protected, and we weren't to infringe, et cetera, which is actually part of the problem. We sterilize the dying process, we sterilize people from their own experience, and in fact, anybody who's worked with the dying, they're lonely and they're isolated, and they're usually looking up at a white ceiling. And in fact, they want to be connected and they want to be human. And that's what we found. People don't decline to participate. And for me, that was one of the takeaways from doing this book, was that everybody who was approached participated. And actually, everybody who's named in here, that's their name with the exception of one, which is kind of ironic. He's called Eddie the Cop here, and he was covered by the New York Times. And the only reason it's not his real name is because he had been molested by an uncle. The children were trying to protect the aunt So they wanted a different name. The aunt comes in to be interviewed for the book, and she insists they use a different name because she's trying to protect the children. But otherwise, everybody is who they are. And I just, in closing, I just would like to read part of the epilogue. Before this book ends, I need to go back to how it began. It's simple. When approached, not a single patient or family declined to participate. It's difficult to express the depth of my gratitude, but while it is customary to do so, my thankfulness would actually miss the point. These patients and families did not participate because I asked them. They participated because they wanted to contribute. No matter how ill a person may be, this need to give back is inherent in the struggle to remain connected and human. Even those left behind, the bereaved, fought through tears to give back, in hopes of bringing comfort and understanding to others. Dying may be isolating and even lonely, but patients often find comfort in spaces where they can continue to express themselves, connect with others, and still matter. Long after the battle to overcome illness is lost, the dying continue to fight, but they are not fighting against, only for and toward. They fight to have relevance, to find meaning, right up until their very last breath. Why else would people, bedridden and fading, find in themselves to share their stories? Not the embellished versions we typically tell, but the real stuff that comes from having lived and mattered, from heartfelt pains, deep secrets, and distant losses to enduring love and wisdom gained. These moments, measured in days and hours, are not motivated by the possibility of any future gain. They constitute a wished-for and self-generated ending. Illness and tragedy naturally demand that we look inward, an artifact of our fight for survival and our innate resistance against mortality. As sickness begins to overtake the drive to live, there is a shift. The dying continue to cherish life, but not for themselves, for others. They express concern for loved ones in gestures of kindness and hope, even as they say goodbye. Buried within these stories is the same awe-inspiring message repeated again and again. This book evolved from these final goodbyes while relaying stories of hope and even grace. So it is with reverence, not gratitude, that I acknowledge the patients and families who contributed to the writing of these, their stories. These are people who had faith that their voices, softened or at times silent, mattered, and that they would still be heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was really wonderful. And I think what you sort of shared with us, those of us that are caregivers, clinicians, but also I think just those of us that are humans and those of us that are living with illness and caring for those who are living with illness and approaching the end of life, that you're really sharing something that's truly good news. And for patients, the good news I hear, or part of the good news is you're not alone, and help is on hand. And for the caregivers, the good news is it's not all up to you. It's not all on your shoulders to make this experience better. Your patients that you're caring for, or your loved one that you're caring for, has this incredible potential within themselves. And there is more going on, and there is this kind of mysterious element to the process, and kind of having a real humility in the face of that. But there's also a challenge, I think, to those of us that are caregivers in how to help those that we're caring for to realize this potential and to validate their experiences. And you know, in your stories that you've just shared with us, and I'm also thinking, having just had the opportunity to read your beautiful book, Death is But a Dream, you advocate, what you're really advocating for is nothing short of a paradigm shift. in healthcare, from a sort of top-down approach where doctors are seen as the ones with the knowledge and the skills and the know-how to heal their patients, to a different kind of paradigm, which is much more about a kind of a shared process, where clinician skills are still important and relevant, but where the person who's the patient, where their innate potential for finding healing and meaning within their experience is at the center. You write in the early pages of your book, doctors owe it to their patients to incorporate this awareness into their practice. End-of-life experiences ought to be recognized as evidence of the life-affirming and inspiring resilience of the human spirit that drives them. They're proof of humanity's built-in, natural, and profoundly spiritual capacity for self-sustenance and self-healing, grace and hope. They help restore meaning at the end of life, and they assist in reclaiming the dying as a process in which patients have a say. They also benefit those left behind, the bereaved, who get relief from seeing their loved ones die with a sense of peace and closure, which we heard so powerfully again and again from the relatives just now. So, Chris, my question for you is, what does this all mean for those of us who are caregivers? You know, professional caregivers, yes, doctors, nurses, clinicians, but also those of us who are family members, who are caring for a seriously ill loved one or someone approaching death. You've made it clear that it's not about us all becoming psychoanalysts. And, and I realize that this is more than one question, but, how do we do this? Can you paint a picture on what this might look at the bedsides of the loved ones we cared for?
Sure. Well, I take a broader view first. I think that what we've somehow managed to do is we've taken a profoundly human experience and we've medicalized it to the point that we've actually dehumanized it. And in order to reclaim it, to find our way again, we have to view it as more than a medical problem to be solved. And in fact, there's a small role for medicine, modern medicine, when we think about it. In fact, nature assumes its rightful place, and medicine really goes somewhere else. And if it's to be a human experience, it needs to be approached in dimensions that are spiritual, psychological, built on relationships. So I think that's the first thing that has to be. Stop looking at it as a medical treatise to address. It really is life closure. It's not more organ failure. Really, the patient in the bed doesn't care what their renal function is anymore, or their heart echo, or what their labs show. What they get reduced to is the best things for having lived. They're returned to that state, and that's what needs to be connected to. I think in terms of actually how that happens at the bedside, I think it first happens with permission, with granting space, for normalizing. So the conversation should always be something to this, is that it's very common for people at this point to be reflective and even be having powerful dreams or visions of things that may have mattered that are returned to you. Are you having those? It's analogous to talking about men about anxiety who are short of breath. If you ask somebody, are you anxious? They'll probably say no. But you say, it's pretty common if you're short of breath, you're built to be anxious. Are you anxious? That's a very different discussion. So I think one of the mistakes is to look to medicine for these answers. That would be utopic, and I would hope that that's where clinicians go to. But I think it's a lot to ask in this medical culture. For them to be comforters of the dying. Because what that requires is presence. And I think that's becoming harder to do in a highly regulated medical physician-patient dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. One of the things you write is, as doctors, we owe it to patients to support and facilitate their capacity for self-healing and self-nurture. And so, I totally agree with what you say about, the dying process being a human process and a natural process rather than a medical process, a bit like birth, and that, and yet there is still a role for us as clinicians around the edges of that, in terms of doing what we can to make the physical aspects of that process easier. And help in practical ways with the patient and the family. But I guess, I'm still, a lot of dying is still going to happen in our medical institutions, in our hospitals, and even in our hospices and our home care hospice programs. We have a tendency to come at the process through a medical, clinical kind of perspective. And it seems to me we really need to think about how we validate and educate clinicians just to simply be there in that present human way that you talk about.
Well, it starts, I think, by changing this whole construct of there's nothing more we can do for you. Those are probably the worst things one person providing care to another in need can say. What that really means is there's nothing more interventionally or curative we can do for you. In fact, there's more you can do for the person on a human dimension by just being present. But the truth is we're so enculturated as physicians to have a role when we're proactive and intervening and doing something to that person. It's a role reversal, because what I hope the book is saying is a lot of what to do actually resides in the person who's dying. And so instead of, that doesn't require an intervention, that requires being receptive to hearing, again, creating space or permission for that dialogue to occur. And it takes stopping, There isn't a next thing in the protocol to do other than sit and be present. And that's a very hard thing. In terms of young doctors, I actually think there's a multitude of reasons why this becomes important. One is, I think that's where the true richnesses of the calling occur, is intending to patients as people. And I think emphasizing that in training becomes important and ultimately far more gratifying. Medicine's tough, it's time-consuming, but it can be enriching if it's placed back into a human caring for a human. And that's what really end-of-life care becomes.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking how, back to the very beginnings of medicine, way back to ancient Greece, where if somebody was seriously ill, yes, they would go and see their Hippocratic physician. If you lived on the island of Kos, you might actually have got to see Hippocrates himself sitting under the plane tree with his students. And he would do what he could with rational, evidence-based medicine to kind of fix what could be fixed. But he had a real sense of the kind of limits of what he could do. And he also had a profound respect for that whole other system of healing that existed in the ancient world, which was temple medicine. And so he would say, I've done what I can for you, go to the temple. And at the temple, the central practice was dream incubation. The patient was encouraged, after being prepared, to lie on the ground, and whatever dream they had that night, to take notice, to appreciate, this was a visit from the God of healing. And just seeing that as a metaphor, what's at the core of that is, yeah, we can do what we can do as clinicians, but patients have within them this incredible self-healing capacity. And I think that's one of the things, if we could somehow get that across in medical education, that it's not all up to you, it's not all up to us and our expertise and our knowledge, that that patients really have that. And we see that kind of so strongly in the birth process, but we also see it in the dying process. You know, I often find myself saying to families, probably more than to patients, but you know, that our bodies know how to die. We can work alongside them to kind of make the process as, you know, as comfortable and easy as possible. But, you know, we don't get really hungry towards the end. We don't get really thirsty. You know, there's a whole preparation there for the transition. But that's also true psychologically, spiritually, that we've been doing this for hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of years. The human body has been going through this transition. And the physical body and the psychological body and process knows how to do this. And so it's kind of, one of the things that really struck me, Chris, was that, you know, coming towards the end of your book is, and it's all throughout your book, but is that you've really come to this place of incredible humility as a physician. Yeah. And you talk, you know, that little piece you read us at the very end, from the end of the book, you talk about having come to a place of reverence for your patients, gratitude and reverence. Yeah. And it's that incredible sense that you know, we're around the edge, that the patient, yes, has the illness, but they also have this incredible potential. Yeah. And we're there to kind of hold that and facilitate that. And so
and if I were to be honest, if I can get there, anybody can. Because, you know, I got dragged. And it took really coming out of the security of a technical, acute-based hospital environment, and really having to listen to your colleagues in other fields. I love what you're saying. It requires two things be met. One is the physician to acknowledge that they don't know things, and that's hard. Mm-hmm. The other thing is for them to honor and have reverence for things that aren't seen, that can't be measured, that can't be quantified, that can't be imaged and biopsied, and that's hard. Mm-hmm. And I love that you take it from a historical perspective, because we actually got it right when we knew less. You know, mm-hmm, I mean, we've become so self-enamored with what we're capable of doing and understanding at a genetic level, for example, that we've lost the other paces of what goes into the experience of illness. Which is what's felt, which is what's thought, it's what's imagined, it's what's feared, and those things have got lost.
And I'm not sure we can really validate and recognize those experiences in our patients, those of us that are caregivers, if we're not recognizing and validating those experiences in ourselves.
Yes.
You know, and that was, I was lucky to be part of a process at McGill University in Montreal in the early 2000s, where we were introducing a training in healing to the medical curriculum. And we had a 2-year working group that came up with, was kind of brainstorming, how do we come up and do this? Because part of our tasks as clinicians is not just to prevent and cure, but is to facilitate this inner process, which you so beautifully just shared with us, that happens right up to the very last moment of our lives, this sort of inner healing. And where we came to was that the piece that's really been excluded from medical education is the subjective inner experience of medical students. And if we can find...
It's actively being shut down.
It's actually shut down.
Yeah, I think you can make the argument that the art of medicine is actually de-evolving. The hopeful part, my editorial on this, the more hopeful part of it is, I think we're evolving outside of medicine. I think there's, culturally, there's an expectation that we reclaim aspects of the dying process from people who are either experiencing it or caring for somebody who's experiencing it. So I'm in the short run, in my lifetime, I'm less hopeful that this is going to come out of pure medicine, but I think that it's going to come from outside.
Interesting. Chris, if I could ask you one kind of practical question, you know, the the dreams and visions and experiences you've just shared with us through these stories have been sort of, I think, positive and clearly healing, not just for the individuals who experience them directly, but for their families. Can you talk to us a little bit about, difficult dreams, our frightening visions, our nightmares? How did these come up in your research, and how did you approach them?
About 17-18% of people actually on survey record discomforting or distressing dreams. And I actually would have shown you the videos of that, but I showed them last year. I actually think they're the most interesting, and they have the power to be the most transformative. I think we got it terribly wrong when we started this. We were naive. We viewed it as a binary issue, comforting or distressing. And what we missed was that the distressing actually can mean most meaningful. And the truth is people die how they live. And the video that I would like to show, and if you don't mind me telling you the brief story of Dwayne, who was in his 40s, and he had been on crack since the age of 16. He was in prison more than he was out of prison in his life. He had murdered 2 people in self-defense and never served time for either of those. He had one of those lives that he couldn't afford to look backwards. In order to survive, he had to look forward, and he was actually jovial, upbeat, and he was highly intelligent. He was funny. And what happened is we were filming him about his experiences, and he started off joking about sexual dreams, and then he all of a sudden lost his composure, and he decompensated in front of camera, uncontrollably sobbing. He had head and neck cancer with open wounds in his neck, and his dreams were actually that he was being stabbed by all the people who he had harmed. And for the first time, he acknowledged, and he had to explain himself. You don't understand, it was the drugs that I was on, I was trying to survive, etc. Now, as you and I both know, it's very hard to die comfortably if you're not only, if you can't sleep, if you not only have physical pain, but psychogenic pain has to be addressed. He couldn't sleep and he was tormented. But what happened was, he awoke from these nightmares with a powerful need to reach out to a daughter. And we got a hold of the daughter and brought her in. And it was the most remarkable moment. He's walking with a walker, and he just pulls the arm away from the nurse who's holding his hand. And they sat there in the hallway, holding and hugging and crying for minutes. And for the first time, he just said, "I'm so sorry," and expressed his love for her. After that, she stayed with him for the remaining weeks. He slept peacefully, and he died. And he got there through the side door, but he got there. And so, yes, he had discomforting dreams, but actually he had the most meaningful dreams that really transformed how he viewed himself. And he was put back together in a very odd way at the end. And those sort of phenomena, we have got many examples. The one in the book, for example, a man who revisits the invasion of Normandy. 67 years, he had PTSD. And he's finally relieved. And you think of it, the point in the book is there was no drug therapy, there's no talking therapy. You talked about the inner resource to find a different place within us. I think that's actually what happens even more so in people who are having harmful and discomforting and distressing experiences, is somehow they reach inside and they find a better way out. It's remarkable.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you. Chris, for a family member who's caring for somebody who's close to the end of their lives in their own home, or visiting that person in hospital or in a hospice, what could you, is there something you would, do you encourage us to, when we go in first thing in the morning and ask that person how they slept last night, to ask them, did you dream last night? Do you give Can you give any kind of
I-
simple pointers to
I-
how we could invite the kind of conversation around these experiences?
Well, first of all, we always say the fifth vital sign is pain, and I actually think the holy grail is sleep. Without quality restorative, it's the one commonality, the end point of illness is this pull to sleep comfortably. If you can't sleep comfortably, dying becomes highly problematic. So I think as a measure of dying, we need to know how people sleep. But, I think it's important not just for the patient, for the bereaved person, the caregiving person. The question that I would ask if I was looking at a loved one in a bed with their eyes closed is, where are they? How are they? And I think that's okay to ask. I think the idea that you can't approach that is a disconnecting judgment. And I think it's okay, and it's quite natural. And I can just tell you my own experience, and in the work we've done, is people were like, yeah. Well, this is, some people are more revealing than others, but it's also often addressing a misconception, because periodically you do have people who say things, boy, I thought the tumor went to my brain. I thought this was just me. I thought this was the medication. All sorts of misconceptions. So going there first and discussing it and normalizing it also becomes important for contextualizing it. Because the inverse can be that somebody's misconstruing what's happening to them.
Beautiful. Yeah, thank you so much. One other question I have for you, Chris, is have you noticed in your research any differences among different sort of cultural groups, European Americans, African Americans, Native Americans, different kind of...
Unfortunately, as you know, minority groups are so poorly represented in hospice. We certainly have them, and we can't, we don't have the numbers to statistically prove or disprove, but we have not seen variations. The commonality is there throughout. The other thing that's interesting is when you look at religious belief systems, which is always problematic, because, for example, somebody could write, I'm Catholic, but they may not be practicing, or you know what I mean? But we don't see differences there, and we've looked.
Okay. Thank you for that. One of the things I've heard you saying, I think it was in your talk last year, but it kind of comes through again in the stories you just shared with us this morning, is though it's as though the dreams that come to individuals close to the end of their life, that they're almost more like answers than they are questions.
Yeah.
And that stayed with me. I think there's something really beautiful about that. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah, it's spectacular. Well, if you think of it, the time for therapy is over. And there's not anybody who looks at this who doesn't want to do something to it. And I get the question, why don't you bring in a psychologist at that point? And the thing is honestly, I've never had the experience where somebody looked up from a bed and say, hey, doctor, what do you think this means? And it's so highly personalized, individualized, and owned that there sometimes isn't even a need to share. But it also happened in a way that's matter of fact. And the other thing I love, and this seems to be a big difference from people who have near-death experiences. They come out of that experience, white light tunnels, which we don't see, and a need to proselytize and write books and tell them what God told them or what an angel told them, and da-da-da. Never heard it. There's no unveiling. There's no great epiphany. There's no trumpet. It's more life. And sometimes it's just about the sauce. It's the little things that are the biggest things, but they don't require explanation.
They just are.
Well, it goes back to your point that it's built in and innate. It's part of the human experience, and some of it's completely understandable. At the very end of life, you should go back to what mattered most. There should be a better story, that the things that are most meaningful aren't actually lost. They're there in you. Earlier in disease, you stop worrying about paying the bills and the little things that complicate actually experiencing life. As you get closer to the end, I think that's even more pronounced. And the relationships that are complicated seem to go by the wayside, and what truly matters is at surface. So,
It's sort of falling into place, sort of
yes,
rightness.
Yeah. I like this idea of being made whole or put back together. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And that's a beautiful way to end. And thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, as always. Pleasure.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marion Watts and our founders would be very proud. We're going back to our roots with VNA in our name, but we still are going to maintain all of the caring and compassion that we provided to this community for over 110 years. People choose VNA Health because we're the oldest provider in Santa Barbara. We're the most comprehensive provider of home care services. We're part of the fabric of the community here, and I just feel that we give the best care.
The truth is that hospice is really about how you live. And so the idea of living well is a really important kind of core to what hospice care is.
There's something that's rewarding when it comes to being able to really ask the patient, what do you want to do and how do you want to do this? And then be able to provide those things for them.
So live well is not just about getting well or recovering from an illness, but it's also about living your life as well as possible.
There's a synergy between home health and hospice. They're like a jigsaw puzzle. They bind and they close together without any friction.
One of the special things at VNA Health is that we have home health and hospice care. So we're able to seamlessly transfer patients to the best level of care that they need.
The staff that I work with and work for are truly some of the best people I've been able to work with, both in healthcare and outside of healthcare. You guys, I just want you to remember that we're here for the patients and their families, that they can live well, and so remember when you're out there what we're doing this for.
We care for one another, and it's apparent in our everyday interactions. We truly are a family, and you can really feel that love and compassion come through not only for patients, but for each other.
When I see a smiling face, when I see that the patient is in no way distressed, and the satisfaction that they are in a place where they are comfortable in, that is my satisfaction.
I would certainly recommend VNA Health to anybody. I think our quality of life is much better now than it was, and we can trace it back to the months of help that we got from Rebecca. At one point, she looked over at Mal and she said, "Mal, how are you feeling? You look tired." And he said, "Well, yes, I am. I'm very tired."
Rebecca noted that my lips were beginning to turn blue, and she confirmed that it was ventricular tachycardia.
She just saved his life. It was very serious. And if she hadn't been there, who knows, he wouldn't be here right now.
Live well means many things. So live well means getting to stay at home. Live well means being independent. It's being educated about your disease and your medications and being the CEO of your health. Live well means at end of life that it's about quality and not quantity. It's about leaving your family members intact so they're able to move on and live a full life. All of those things are live well.